All right, so today I want to talk about this tweet from Patrick Moore. He goes on to say the interglacial period prior to the Holocene is the Eemian. The Eemian In the Eemian, the global temperature was between 2 to 4 degrees Celsius higher than today, even though that time CO2 was at 280 parts per million, about the same as it was in 1850 when it was even colder than today. CO2 does not control temperature. Now he goes on to show the graph here, and the thing about CO2 is that we know that it correlates slightly with temperature, but it isn't a one for one like people would have you think. And the problem with this, and I mean the reason why I want to talk about it is it's one of the most hotly contested issues out there, in that we have the carbon tax in Canada, which is the government's solution to climate change, which it's not going to fix the problem. They're just gonna. I mean, my prediction is, and I would bet a lot of money on this, is that they'll just keep ramping it up to a point to where eventually the people will be up in arms, and then they'll just transition it to some other socialist policy. And we know that the real goal is socialism. Number one, for the fact that the carbon tax doesn't work. Like I always mention, I've mentioned this so many times, people still don't listen. The BC government's own numbers show that it had almost no effect, 0.5% decrease in CO2 emissions for spending insane amounts of money. Again, if you turned around and invested that money in, there's tons of other causes that you could invest that in that would do way more good for society than reducing it by 0.5%, when the evidence seems to point to that CO2 doesn't even have much of an effect on climate anyways. It's completely flawed science. Even this is the problem with the whole thing. Even if CO2 controlled climate, the carbon tax still doesn't work, and the problem is we know a carbon tax doesn't work. So the levels of backward science is absolutely insane here. And like I said, it's important stuff because this isn't stuff that's taught in school. They feed people completely BS lies about how it controls climate when again we know it doesn't. You look at the hottest years on record. The United States has been keeping track of temperatures for like I think a little over 100 years now. And the hottest years were, I think they're all in the 1930s, and the hottest year CO2 was much lower than it was now. You look at the years with the most hurricanes, with the most tornadoes, lower CO2. So again, this idea that CO2 and climate are very closely correlated is it's not true. And why this is so important is that we have this idea in Canada that CO2 and climate are linked when they aren't. And even if they are linked, like I said, we know a carbon tax doesn't work to begin with. And this is the big problem. We have people that are supposedly experts, that supposedly have our best interests at heart, that clearly don't. And like I say, the goal with this is socialism. And if we could just be honest with it about it, this is the big problem I have with people and why I always harp on it. The real goal is socialism. If all these people would just be honest, at least we could have an actual, cordial conversation about it, but we can't because they have to lie and manipulate people about their true intentions. And this is why there's so much political discord and so much political tension out there nowadays, is that we have one side of the political spectrum, and I mean, as bad as the conservatives are, the left is much worse. There's no denying that. I'm not someone who's really a big fan of either side. Um, and that they're always manipulating people with their beliefs. The right tends to be more individualistic, more less project. They don't project nearly as much, and the right tends to be people who are more either the people that they donate to charity a lot more, so they're again more individualistic. The left is people who are more less individualistic, more collective, more selfish, all that kind of stuff. Um, which is why they always project, and which is why they also have this idea that, oh, any reason, this whole, it's how the old saying goes, the left believes the right is evil and the right believes the left is misguided, and it's a very true statement. And basically, to bring it full circle, this is important stuff. And I can't stand the people that still defend the carbon tax. And there's a lot of people that that don't believe in the carbon tax, but they still defend it. And again, you wouldn't believe the amount of people that I've literally seen comment, after videos I make about climate change that think, oh well, how stupid do you have to be that you care about, or how much of a nitpicker do you have to be to um, complain about 5 cents. It's not actually 5 cents, but roughly 5 cents a liter in gas. And like, it's absolutely insane that people actually believe that, because carbon tax is a tax on everything, and it's even a double triple tax on everything. Take food, for example. Food needs to be grown. Let's just take something. Food needs to be grown. Well, guess what? People need tractors. They need machinery to grow the food, which takes gas to operate. Which, okay, it's taxed there. They need, not only that. Let's even start at the beginning. They need a truck usually to go pick up the seed for the food, or to go plant the food. To drive back and forth to maintain and grow the food. Okay, it's taxed there. They need gas and heat and all that stuff to make the equipment you need to grow the food. It's taxed there. To harvest the food. Okay, you need a lot of gas there. Tons of gas. Um, it's taxed there, gas or diesel, I guess. And then guess what? You need diesel to go sell it. Okay, or gas or diesel. It's taxed there. You need gas or diesel to process it. Okay, it's taxed there. You need gas or diesel to deliver the food. Okay, it's taxed there. You need gas or diesel for whatever store is selling the food to have freezers and to have heat and electricity, and all that kind of stuff. Okay, it's taxed there. So before, like, how many times was it been taxed? Like, and again, these people literally think, oh, it's just a tax on gas you fill up at the pump, but yet they're so in such a bubble, and so uneducated. I don't like using that term, but I'm going to use it. That they actually think that it's just this little 5 cent tax on gas, and the problem is that when you actually think about it, there's actually multiple taxes, and the price of food has been going up drastically, like drastically. If there's a specific food that you've been buying, in the same size, same everything for, a period of at least 4 or 5 years, the cost has gone way up, like way up. And it's clearly more than like the typical, 2% inflation that the government always, wants to hit. It's probably 5%. I'm off the top of my head. It's a very high amount, much higher than it should be. And again, wanted to talk about that kind of stuff because it's money out of people's pockets. It doesn't need to be taken. It's just another excuse for government to tax people, I think, too. I think that the Trudeau governments of the world know that we're on a path to bankruptcy. And maybe if they can and the way they get elected is to promise people free stuff. So if they can tax people a little bit more, well, guess what? That's just a little bit more free stuff that they can promise people to get reelected. And again, it's very sad that that's the way things are run, but most people defend the system. Again, this is something I can't stand about a lot of people out there now too. They complain about corruption in corporations and stuff like that, which they think it's the free market, which it isn't by any step of the way. It isn't the free market, but even if it is, and yet they'll turn around and defend, or at least defend by default, by not talking about all this corruption that goes on in government. And government is much more powerful than a corporation. Like, dude, the left thinks that all this, everything about society is based on power and privilege and all this kind of stuff. But they completely, and again, it's just contradiction after contradiction, but they completely ignore the fact that a head of a corporation that employs, I don't know, 10,000 people has much less power in society than the prime minister, or even an MP. An MP has much more power than, because an MP oversees, what, 100,000 people in his district, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. In Alberta, it's a very high amount of people. Again, just add it to the list of the ways Alberta gets screwed. I think Alberta has the least MPs per capita, and just so happens to be that it's all the eastern, more liberal dominated provinces that have the least. I think Alberta has almost double as a lot of the maritime provinces, which again, the left vehemently attacks the electoral college system in the states, but yet they'll defend though, even though the States isn't a direct democracy, so it's kind of a stupid argument. Canada technically is a direct democracy, but yet they'll conveniently ignore that. It just goes to show where their actual standards lie. That if your standards only exist on one side of the aisle, then you have no standards. And that's what the left, they blatantly tell people that, by completely ignoring things, that they have no standards. Again, take the whole Kavanaugh thing in the States, just as an example. Everyone was all over, even though there was absolutely no evidence whatsoever that he did what they claimed he did. Um, and they're all over him too. They literally wanted him to lose his entire career, basically his life. Um, and yet you have Joe Biden, who is accused now, and I would say that the evidence is definitely more credible. I wouldn't go as far to say that it's clear cut, but it's clearly at least somewhat credible. And yet all these lefties are saying, "Oh yeah, we have to vote for him because they hate Trump that much." Again, just complete double standard, complete lack of integrity and ethics. Absolutely astounds me. But anyway, I'm going to leave the video there. I think I've got the point across pretty good. If you'd like to, make sure to like and subscribe. I do have my PayPal and email linked in the description. Last thing I always want to mention too, check out my BitChute channel. Again, YouTube's going to ban or shadow ban me at some point, so check that out.